Welcome, everybody. We're very excited that you're here and supporting Film Impact Georgia. If you're not familiar with our organization, we provide grants, education, and different opportunities to filmmakers and creators in the state of Georgia. We have a pledge. With that, we work to break down the socioeconomic barriers of entry into film and television for Georgia residents. I will recap these again at the very end, but I just want to mention a couple of things that we have going on. We have a logline contest that's currently running, so you can win some cash. The theme is isolation for the month of May, but we plan on doing it for the next two months as well. Our short film grant is currently open for applications. It's $5,000 to make a short film. Our deadline for this short film grant is July 1st, but we do that twice a year. We have COVID-19 resources on our website, including access to different free things that are being offered for people right now. And then we have two Ask a Pro Anything events lined up directly after this. One of those is next Thursday with the screenwriters Lane and Ruckus Sky. Their experience runs a gamut in the feature film world, from adapting books to script punch-ups to original scripts and specs. So that's Thursday, May 7th. And then Thursday, May 14th, we have Ben Weisner. He produced a feature film, Beast here in Georgia, that just played at Sundance and should have played at South by Southwest, which I'm sure he will talk about. And he has developed a short film to feature film lab based on the success of their film Thunder Road, which he was a producer on. So those are just a couple of things that we have coming up, and we appreciate all of y'all being here.
Yes, thank you so much. We are very excited to have a interesting dynamic, because we've never had two guests at the same time. So 2 for the price of 1, which is kind of how you often work. So I'll just let them kind of introduce themselves and tell you about their background. So take it away, please.
Okay.
All right. Go ahead, LeeAnne.
Well, I'm LeeAnne, and this is Brian.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having us. I was just telling Raymond and Molly, this is so much better than sitting staring at the wall in our house. It's good to see all of your faces. So we are the showrunners, creators, and writers on a show called Dwight in Shining Armor that airs on BYUtv domestically, and also was recently picked up by Paramount to be distributed all over the world. So it's airing currently, we've sort of lost track. But I think it's in New Zealand and
Australia, France, Belgium. We think Canada. We're waiting to get updates constantly.
The head of obviously all of this weird coronavirus stuff has changed that. We haven't talked to the guys in Paramount for a while. I think they're all hiding under their beds at their house. So anyway, Dwight in Shining Armor, you can check it out on byutv.org/Dwight, or just Google Dwight in Shining Armor. You can watch the first almost 3 seasons there for free. And we shoot in Georgia, in Hiram, which is sort of outside, if you know Georgia, outside of Atlanta. And we hope to be shooting season 5 there whenever we're...
This summer, we hope, fingers crossed, but this year is the hope to have season 5 in the can.
Yeah, whenever we're let out of solitary confinement.
This is great. You know, it's funny. I feel like the show really does have a great international appeal, just because it is a comedy, but it also has, you know, fantasy elements and all these sorts of things. So I could totally see. Honestly, it felt very Canadian in my mind for some reason.
You know,
because everyone's so nice.
People are right. They're very like Dwight.
And they love bacon.
Yeah. I mean that as a compliment, you know.
Well, we hope so too. It is an unusual little show. It was designed to be real co-viewing, which is something that we've lost in the industry in the last 20 years, where things have become so very segmented. This show was really trying to go back to programming that might have existed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that many of us grew up with, where there was something for the kids, something for the teens, and something for adults. So we really tried to make it an honest-to-goodness family show intended for all of those quadrants. And that I think is part of the appeal of the show. You can watch it with your kid, and you can watch it with your mom or your grandma. So
well, that's been really encouraging and rewarding for us. We've actually had fans reach out to us. I think the most, someone said they had 4 generations watching the show together, which that's pretty unique.
That was the goal.
Right.
So let's take it back a little bit. And so obviously your writing partner, writing couple, I should say.
Yes.
Is,
We are married, by the way. We should get that out. We're not brother and sister.
You're not breaking quarantine. Yeah.
We have a family. We've made babies.
Ah.
So yeah, we are definitely a family, and we do everything together. So which is mostly great, but definitely has challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
I had the experience of making a short film with my girlfriend last year, so I can only partially relate.
How did that go?
Are you still together?
Yeah, we're still together. We won some awards, so yeah, it's great. How did this come about? Obviously, were you writing with partners beforehand, or was this something? Were you in the industry beforehand? How did this come about?
Actually, no. We've been married and together for a really long time, and LeeAnne has been a writer forever. She's one of those rare people who knew what she wanted to do from the time she was like 12. She wanted to be a writer, and she's been doing it. In fact, to brag about my wife for a moment, when she was like 16, she won a national award through the Sundance Institute and got to go up there and work with Robert Redford, and so she was doing all that. She also later, when I met her, she was working on this was all for stage work. She worked on a play called Archipelago, which won an award to the Kennedy Center and all that stuff. And then I was an accounting major when I met her. So she sucked me into it.
Well, that's not entirely fair. Brian also has, in spite of him being an accounting major, when I met him, definitely had a creative background and had a public access TV show in high school that he and his friends did.
That was my big claim to fame.
Very much like Wayne's World.
Yeah, kind of like that.
You have to think of Brian like Wayne's World.
I had longer hair.
So he didn't realize that he was training to be a producer when he did this public access show with his friends. It was just meant to be fun, but so many of the elements that he taught himself as a kid ended up we use them every day. So we met in college, and then there was a moment at that time I just wanted to be a playwright, I thought, but I started dabbling a little in screenwriting. Wow, this is exciting. It's very different than writing for stage. It's very exciting. And so there was a moment when we were going to graduate from college where we're like, all right, which coast do we go to? Do we go to New York and pursue stage? Do we go to LA and pursue TV and film? And although my first love is stage and always will be, there's no money in it. And so we went to LA, and basically we pounded pavement, and Brian was my first manager, helped me get an agent. And in that time we started writing together. And once we started writing together, we couldn't really imagine ever not writing together after that. So we've been writing together. We started mostly writing features, worked for Disney Channel, Vanguard Animation, Awesomeness TV, Amazon, and all of that was in feature. And then about 4 years ago, we made the leap that many writers made in that same period of time when the feature world was becoming so very constricted at the same moment that the TV world was really blossoming. And so we said, you know what, we need to develop a new skill set and make the jump to TV. So we started writing spec pilots, and Dwight was one of those pilots that we wrote.
Yep.
That's amazing. So getting into some of your processes, we've talked a lot about pitches and just, how to interact with the studios, because a lot of times that's what our audience is really interested in. How do you get in? How do you make a good impression? And then how do you, leave knowing that maybe you did a good job? So, and that's also very difficult to figure out. So can you talk a little bit about your pitch for Dwight, what the original idea consisted of? You mentioned about it being more of a, multi-generational show. Can you talk about a little bit about your initial pitch?
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay. So Dwight went through a lot of different iterations. And when we first got the idea, we were still in that feature mindset. So we started kind of developing it as a kind of a rom-com feature. And then Enchanted came out. And we're like, oh my gosh. Because it's not the exact same story, but it had enough in common with it that we thought, well, that kills that idea. So, we felt sad for a couple of days. We put it away. We stopped thinking about it. And then we're like, you know what? There is a different telling of this story that it's fine if it can live in the same universe as Enchanted.
Yeah, and we actually, so when we moved from feature, the idea that it was a feature to a TV show, we actually ended up optioning it to another network, and we ended up developing it for like 2 years, almost 2 years, and then that got canceled. And it was a devastating day. This was several years ago that we had that, and it was an animated feature at that point, and we had a whole team of artists working on it. But then our network executive got axed, and all of his shows got axed, and so it was a devastating day. But I think the hope or the good part of that story is there was still hope. So then we developed it into a live action 30-minute single cam, and that's when we actually were introduced to BYUtv, which is a weird little network, but they were explaining, we met them and they were kind of telling us what they wanted. They were actually looking for something that was co-viewing, that could bring all the family members on the couch at this same time to watch a show. And when we started hearing that, we're like, this is going to be a really good meeting. And so we pitched them Dwight. They read this script, and which we already had because we had written it as a spec script for a half-hour, single cam comedy. And they loved the script, and then things went, really quickly from that point. I think we gave them the script in like May, and we were shooting the pilot in November of 2017.
It went really fast.
But there had been like literally 10 years of drum roll before it went really fast. So it's one of those, stories that you just got to keep going. And of course, one last thing. We were developing a lot of other stories at the same time. And we had other jobs and we were selling other stuff, but you have to have a lot of irons in the fire. So,
I guess the takeaway, the Dwight went through quite a journey, as every single project does. But the takeaway there is, if there's an idea that you really love, that you feel has a lot of strength, it may go through many permutations before it lands on its ideal form. And that's okay. That's all part of the process. I mean, we beat it out as a feature, and it would have been a really fun feature, but it wasn't the best iteration of the idea. And we spent, as Brian said, years developing it as an 11-minute animated comedy for kids. And that was honestly really good and really frustrating too, because we could tell it wasn't quite the rich world we wanted it to be, and it was not turning into what we really hoped it could be. And then the heartbreaking process of that opportunity going away freed us to then revisit it and say, all right, what do we love about this idea, and how can it be its best self? Now that we've had all this experience with the bad versions, now we should be able to see very clearly what the good version is. And once we landed on that script wrote itself quite quickly, and that was the one that other people sparked to. So I guess I would say, hang on to the idea, and if it's not working, it may just be that you haven't approached it the right way, and all of those perceived failures are just helping you to hone the idea in the better direction.
It's true, and it's not, Dwight is not the only one of our ideas that we've had this process with. We're actually, we just sold another show. We can't fully announce it all, but it went through a very similar process. It started as a feature script, and part of this, of course, is the explosion of peak TV, which I hope continues. But so a lot of our ideas that we thought were features, it turns out were TV shows, that sort of stuff. So you got to keep grinding.
That's great. Oh, I have one more question before we get to the audience. So you mentioned that you kind of had this idea of it being this, multi-generational show, and then you found a partnership with a studio or a network that kind of jived in it. I wonder if your script changed dramatically or much at all. I mean, obviously there's different iterations of that, but once you started to work with this studio and like, okay, now we know where this is living, how do we tailor this script, or do we tailor this script to the studio, the station?
What's very interesting about that question is I would say in almost every case, you would be exactly right, that the idea would have to kind of become gelatinous so that it could fit in the mold of this network. Oddly enough, the mold that the network presented to us, we're like, that's Dwight, like that really it checked all the boxes for them. So there was very minor adjustments that needed to be made, and thankfully, like that, this is very rare. I have to say again, very rare. And we've been really spoiled by this network, honestly, because we were very aligned from the early stages on what we all wanted the show to be and the function we wanted it to have, the sense of humor we wanted it to have, remarkably aligned. And then they've also been really wonderful creative partners in the level of trust that they've given to our show, which is not common. So basically we're spoiled, rotten snotheads now that kind of expect to just be able to do what we want and have our network say, this is great. And they do give us notes and they do guide us, and they have special sensitivities. Like the head of their network has almost no tolerance for scatological humor. So we can't say things, like fart and poo and, pee and things like that we're like, you realize you just lost your 8-year-old audience, that we can't do this, but it's okay. Like, we understand that that's just not going to jive with them. But overall, it's been a really uncanny relationship that we've had with them, where we really do see eye to eye on this show.
Yeah, amazing. All right, so we're going to open it up to the audience. Molly, take it away.
Well, yeah, I actually I have a question, because when you went into Dwight, you hadn't showrun a show before.
Right.
I guess my question is kind of like, how do you go in with the confidence that, well, first, I guess you have to make a conscious decision that I want to be the person that's spearheading this project, as opposed to just writing a project and handing it off to someone or selling your idea. I guess, like, how do you go in with the confidence that this is what you want to do? And I kind of assume that you guys had a conversation where you're like, okay, these are like the levels of like what we're willing to do, like going into them.
That is a great question, Molly, and it was a learning process, which again, thankfully the network supported us in, because we actually, funny story, about the time that we got this gig, we saw that the WGA has a showrunner training program, and we're like, perfect. And so we signed up for it. And they're like, you can't be in the showrunner training program if you're already showrunners. We're like, but we don't know what we're doing. So they wouldn't let us be in that. And it was a learning process, especially coming from a feature background, without getting into too much. When we were shooting the pilot, I think we trusted the director a little bit too much. We didn't realize, because obviously in feature, it's like, hey, director, go do it. And that was sort of our approach. And luckily, we actually got to reshoot some of the pilot, which saved it. But we learned, and we had to kind of trust ourselves and trust each other to say, like, this is our show. We're the only ones who know the answer to these questions. Mm-hmm. It's not the director. It's not the network. It's us. And to have that confidence and just to say, like, this is how it is because we created the show and you bought the show. If you like it, you're going to have to do it this way. And, developing that confidence was tricky. Yeah,
well, I think anyone who works in this industry struggles a great deal with a sense of being a fraud.
The imposter syndrome.
The imposter syndrome. I think we all have it. They're like, hold on, they're going to realize any minute I don't know what I'm doing and they're going to fire me. And I think we all have that. So recognizing, I probably have an imposter syndrome. I probably need to overcome this feeling of being a fraud. I've earned my place here. I just having that positive self-talk, like I can handle this, and then surrounding yourself with people who have more experience than you. If you are coming into a situation where you don't have much experience and you're going to have to learn a lot on the job, it becomes really key that you bring around you people who do have the experience and that you have some real guidance in the process. So fortunately, we had directors and producers that we could turn to and close the door and say, okay, this is our first time doing this. Like, we're about to ask you all our dumb questions, and they would help us and guide us. And so those people are really, really key.
That is definitely true. We've had a couple of very important sort of Mr. Miyagi figures that that they understood us. They understood that we had the creative vision, and obviously there was a reason why our show got picked up, because it was good and people liked it, but there was still a lot of stuff we didn't know. And so having that person to say, like, okay, dumb question, what's a C-stand? That those kind of, and we've had those people whom we can really trust. And they've been super helpful. So if you're lucky enough to get in a situation where you are in over your head, you have to have people you can trust. But then at the end of the day, it does come back to saying, thank you, advisor and counselor, for your, advice, but I know what this needs. I know what needs to happen here, and I'm the boss, so we're going to do it this way. So that's a balance.
It definitely is a balance. We haven't achieved it perfectly all the time, and we've definitely made our mistakes. And I feel like our little show has been blessed with more than its share of grace. We've made mistakes. We've done things wrong. We've had disastrous days on set, and something always came together to kind of save it and to save the show. A lot of that, I think, comes from the people that are on our crew that have so much love for their work and love for the show that they're willing to do more, give it more love and give it more energy than you would expect. And that saved our show a lot too. So also cultivating a family on set where people are willing to really fight and make it good, that can be your way to access that grace, which you will need as things do go wrong.
For sure.
Great. Molly, you have an audience question?
Yeah, Rob asked the question, how do you keep it clean and not make it like a Disney Channel show? And I think that you can almost even take the question further because of BYU and like living within that world, like the like at the time, like you can't have coffee and alcohol, and you guys had like pineapple Shasta, and but it didn't feel like I was like consuming a like Mormon television like while watching it. Like how do you walk that line?
Well, so real quick, and then I'll hand it over to you. One of the things that was important to us from the beginning, and luckily we were on the same page with the network, is that this was not a religious program in any way, and there's no hidden message, there's no hidden agenda, and it's not, and we wouldn't have wanted to use our show for something like that. It's not what we conceived it as. So we were really, again, fortunate that they saw that the same way, that it's not about that. It's just about telling a fun, good story. But it's given us a lot of challenges that we have to work within some parameters. Every network has their parameters, and this one has some special ones.
Well, for us, we really tried to set ourselves up for success structurally. So our show is structured to take advantage of some tried and true comedy tropes. We have several odd couples in the show. Specifically, Dwight and Greta are an odd couple, Dwight and Baldrick are an odd couple, Dwight and Clodwig are an odd couple. And so we're able to use a lot of odd couple humor that doesn't rely on vulgarity or scatological humor, that it's just about two people seeing the world really differently and clashing with one another in a funny way. So we have the odd couple happening all the time. We also have many fish out of water, which is another great comedy standard that we draw on that all the time. So Greta and her entire world of medieval weirdies, they're fish out of water in the modern world of Woodside and Dwight's world. And then Dwight regularly gets thrown into their world of medieval, nutcases, and he is the fish out of water in their world. So that's another place we go to all the time. Anytime we find ourselves kind of stalling or feeling like the humor is starting to fizzle, like, okay, who's our odd couple and how are they seeing things differently, and who's a fish out of water and how are they going to do things wrong, and that keeps the engine really running. You want to talk about Worlds Colliding?
Well, yeah, Worlds Colliding. I also wanted to say, sometimes these restrictions have actually been the impetus for some creative ideas that we wouldn't have come to. For example, if we could have just had like a normal bar, then we would have, and we wouldn't have had to think like, okay, what can we do? And this whole Shasta, pineapple Shasta and orange Shasta, it's become a running gag that at least it amuses us. I don't know if it amuses anybody else, but we would never have gotten there. And so that's been kind of
just the idea that all these people from this medieval fantasy world are addicted to sugary drinks and love Shasta products.
Yeah.
For us, it's hysterical.
Well, and it also seems to make sense in the world. If you had been asleep for 1,000 years and you had never had, high fructose corn syrup, you'd be like, this stuff is amazing. Who needs grog when you have pineapple Shasta? So that's been good. And also, like LeeAnne said, another gift that we've given ourselves is this whole idea of worlds colliding, and really that's been the guiding principle for everything we've done and for every department head when we talk to them. We're like, this is a show about worlds colliding, about the modern, relatable suburban world of Woodside colliding with the medieval, world that is totally different. And so much humor comes from that. And it's a really grounded humor that if we never try and play it, over the top or play it for laughs. And we found that that's what's funny. If a troll were to show up at a PTA meeting, and everyone treated him like he had just a very interesting alternative lifestyle, but everyone was trying to, you know, accept him, which is what would probably happen. We found that a lot of humor comes from that, and from the fact that the troll also doesn't see anything weird about this. He's a troll, and now he's here, and so that world colliding humor has been a fountain of comedy for us.
And we've also tried to keep the characters very grounded. We feel like there's so much over the top kind of fantasy happening in the world that the performances can afford to be very understated and grounded, and that will even highlight the over the top fantasiness of the world. So so we've got, you know, a character. We have a character that is a water dragon in a girl's body. It's just the most bizarre thing you can imagine. And she plays it, I mean, she snarls and she hisses and she spits, but she's playing it very, very grounded, like very authentic. And that makes it all the more ridiculous. And we're constantly reminding ourselves that our situations are so big and broad and crazy that the performances have to be really authentic in order for those situations to really shine and be funny. And I think that's what makes it different than a Disney Channel show, where the situation is big and outrageous and the performances are big and outrageous. And so the pitch tends to be just a kind of a screaming level through the entire show.
You know, then we go contrary to our goal, which is to have, you know, a four quadrant, you know, co-viewing show. But that when it gets to that fever pitch, it kind of turns off the adult members of the audience. They're like, this isn't for me, and they walk out. So it's a balancing act. We talked a lot. I hope maybe that answered the question. Maybe it was in there.
That's great. Molly, you want to try another one?
Yeah. So Brooke was asking, have you ever thought about self-funding or crowdfunding something, and then using that to shop it around? Or I know that you come from a screenwriting background.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about making something yourself in order, or like proofs of concept?
Constantly.
Yeah.
we don't know how to approach it, but we're constantly saying, why can't we just do this ourselves? Like, how do we do this ourselves?
Yeah. And we have spent a lot of time in the indie feature world, and we've done, you know, little bits of, you know, fundraising or trying to meet with investors and that sort of stuff. And it's absolutely the ideal world. This show is on a scale that it would be a pretty big budget to try and raise. But I definitely advise, you know, younger filmmakers that the good news is you have an HD camera right here, and you can go start shooting, you know, your project today. And so it's definitely a good idea. And we have, you know, talked a lot about that, and we're definitely continuing to, you know, to explore it, because once the golden rule, whoever has the gold, you know, makes the rules. and so it's a good situation to be in if you can do that.
I'm going to combine a question from the audience and a question from me. Abigail was talking about your spec script, or at least when you pitch the show. You know, Sam Esmail, who created Mr. Robot, he would joke that that started off as a feature and then it just exploded in a TV show because he had so much content. Did you feel, did you design Dwight to be this thing that was, I mean, it is a little episodic, but it does have a through line throughout. Did you decide it in mind where it's like, okay, this is where this entire series is headed to? Or did you come at it with, and specifically for the pitch, did you come as like, here's the pilot, and we can make this go on forever?
Oh, great. So yeah, we had, in our own minds, we knew that we could do at least 60 episodes. We had that much already kind of developed out. Now, when I say developed out, I mean in really high level. Like, we knew who our big bad was going to be for the first 3 seasons, and who the big bad was going to be for seasons 3 through 6. So we had that kind of mapped out. But then we also left ourselves a ton of room for those fun little episodic episodes that are just standalone. So when we went in to pitch it, we basically said that. We're like, we've got a map for this that goes 60 episodes, could go further if you wanted, but let's talk about season 1, because that's what they really want to know about. They want to know that you've thought through the first 10 or the first 20 episodes. Since they're not, in that moment, they're not really anticipating an investment of multiple seasons. They're anticipating, you know, do I want to invest in this for half a season or a full season, or maybe even just a pilot. So in the initial pitch, we reassured them that we had a vast plan that could go for years. And now let's talk about year one. And we really got granular on what the first season was going to look like. And mostly what they cared about, and we found this to be quite true, they want to have a general idea of where the plot is going to go in season one. Like, okay, who's going to be your big villain or the big challenge that will confront the group or the hero. But what they really want to know about is the character arcs of season one. Mm-hmm. How is your protagonist and your number one, number two, number three, how are they all going to grow and change? And how does the pilot look different from the season finale in season one? And if you can lay that out for them, how these characters are going to grow and change, how they're going to look different in the finale than they looked in, not physically, but you know what I mean, than they looked in the pilot, then they're like, oh my gosh, where do we sign? Then it becomes exciting. They know they've got something there. So that was the way we approached it with Dwight, and that we've approached it with every time we've gone in to pitch a TV show. That's always been the approach. And you know, it doesn't always work as well as it did with BYUtv. Yeah. It's still a 99% no business, and that's just the reality. So you have to get in there and pitch a lot and get your heart broken all the time. And then every once in a while, it really will click. But the best chance of success is being able to really tell them a story about season one.
Do you feel like that your initial pitch is what season one ended up looking like, or do you feel like it deviated quite a bit?
I think mostly we were able to stick with our original pitch. A couple things. We've always known the end of our show from the beginning, and we're hopefully going to shoot that this year. So I think that's helpful if you're fortunate enough to get, you know, a planned ending instead of just canceled, you know, out of nowhere. And so that much we did know. We had to tweak it a little bit, and this was a little bit of a devious thing we did. In the beginning, they really wanted an episodic show, and we really wanted a serialized show. And so we, little by little, we started sort of planting more serialized elements in that. And so there was a little bit of tweaking to our original plan that had to happen in order to make that happen.
But what happened was, you know, they were like, no, we really just want this episodic show that we can chop up and air in any order. And we're like, yes, done. And then said, yeah, but we are going to introduce this character who's going to play out a little, you know, he'll have a little something going on. And they're like, great, that sounds great. And the moment we started introducing those more serialized episodes, they're like, oh, we want more of that.
Yeah, they're like,
what
happens
next? So they very quickly, now we've never gone purely serialized. We understand that the character of the show has to keep those episodic episodes that can just kind of burst up, tell a fun little story, and then be done. So that's a huge part of the character of the show. But we've been able to weave in a really deliberate manner, and we're sounding a little more sneaky than we were. We told them about what we were planning to do, and they agreed, but we had to ease them into it. So season one only has two or three episodes that push this serialized story. Then season two has 4 or 5 that have these through lines. And so we've eased them into a more serialized piece of storytelling while still keeping the character of the show that they really wanted. And that was something that changed as we went along.
Yeah.
So since you are a writing team, and I do notice on the credits there are different writers that are involved, can you talk a little bit about your writer's room? And we have a couple questions about writers, writing rooms in general. Because, I mean, honestly, the writers' rooms are still very much a coastal thing. We haven't really broken the wall in Atlanta quite yet as far as larger since outside of Tyler Perry. So talk a little bit about what you look for in writers, and then maybe also how your room is run.
Great question. So we don't have a traditional writer's room, and it's funny. I feel like we were kind of ahead of this trend, even not knowing that there was a trend. But we have a writer's summit. So we have a writer's summit every year, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, where we bring together a team of talented writers, and we break the story arc for the season or for a section of the season that we're looking at, or even, you know, for the larger story arc. And those are usually 2 to 3 day meetings where we're sequestered, and we really get into an ideation process that we use, to break the story. It's kind of a brain spark process, and then we also get a little more granular and talk about specific episodes, and sometimes we break those, depending on how much time we have and how much we need to spend on the bigger process. So we don't have, unfortunately, we just didn't have the budget to have a room where we all meet. Everyone's on a weekly and we all go in every day. It just didn't work out. But that writer's room, I guess they would call it a mini room, or we call it just a writer's summit, has been really helpful to us. And finding writers that understand our show and our voice has been really difficult. I mean, we've gone through a lot of different ways. I mean, we've actually invited some people that we knew, on a personal level or on a professional level, to come into our writer summit, and then we've gone through the process of sending out open writing assignments to agencies, and it's been tricky because after the writer summit we usually sort of assign out an episode to people, and sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't, and we ended up having to rewrite a big chunk of it, and then sometimes we look at it and basically say, like, okay, if we were just going to write this episode ourselves, it would take 2 weeks or a week and a half, however long it is. And if we have to spend more than that time rewriting the person, it's like we could have just written this ourselves. But if that person gives us something back that it only takes a few days to rewrite, then we think, like, okay, this is a good investment of time, because when we're not under coronavirus lockdown, the time is really the most precious commodity.
Yeah, well, and we found that there are different skill sets too. We have some writers that are so good in the ideation that they just come up with great ideas. They keep the conversation going in really productive ways. We definitely want them at the ideations, but their gift is not necessarily to capture the voices of the characters on page. But we still want them in the ideation. So we've kind of figured out that who our writers are that can give us a really good first draft, and who our writers are that are fantastic in the room. I can't overstate how important it is to have those people who are great in the ideation.
Yeah.
It keeps everything moving and it builds your whole season. So we do have writers that come just for that and are immensely valuable to us. And so we're starting right as we get to the end of our show. We've sort of figured out our group. We have our A team.
Yeah.
That it's working really well, and we'll see. It works for us, but our show is really specific. It's a smaller show, smaller budget, and we're way ahead on the schedule. We're shooting now stuff that won't air until next spring. So we have the luxury of working with this kind of a small, intimate group.
Yeah.
You mentioned the writers that you really liked in the room. What are some of the aspects of those writers that really, like, say, that guy, that girl, like, they're doing a great job, I want to bring them in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do what's called a brain spark in our ideation. Some of you may have participated in something like this before, that starts at a really high level of ideation, where you just start with a concept, like for us, we talk a lot about like worlds colliding. Let's think of some scenarios where a medieval element can come smashing into a modern element. So let's start with, what are some medieval tropes, some things that everyone associates with the medieval world or the fantasy world. And then people just start shouting things out. And everything that gets shouted out, you write on a little sticky note and it goes on the wall. And by the end of a few hours, your walls are covered with sticky notes. And so somebody will say, oh, a court jester. And then somebody else will say, oh, what about that thing in the court jester's hand? Could that be a magical element? What's that thing called? And then pretty soon you're just like going on, brain sparking off of one another. So a really valuable person in the room is somebody who is not afraid to just talk and to say stupid stuff, who's not self-conscious and who is willing to just open their mouth and say what they're thinking. Also someone who's willing to sort of play the improv game of yes and
right
with somebody else, because if another member of the group makes a comment that feels like a dud, it can kind of bring down the whole energy. But if somebody else says yes, and how about, yes to your dumb idea, but how about we take it in this other direction, it keeps the energy up. So that person becomes really valuable. Also someone who's able to draw from their own life or experiences and tell a story in the room. As they're telling that story, it gets everybody else thinking, and things start to sparkle in their own minds. So a lot of it comes down to just having the confidence to talk, having the generosity to play off of other people's ideas, and to just share. And that person is really valuable. The worst, the tragic situation for us is someone who comes into the room and we know they're a brilliant writer, and they just sort of sit and listen through the whole ideation. And that is like, dude, help us out. We all need to be working together.
Or a few times we've had some brilliant writer who comes with like, a couple of prepared ideas, and they'll share those, but they're too nervous to jam, to have like a spitball session. And so that's tricky. On the other hand, we've had some people who are just like, they won't shut up, and so that doesn't work either. It is a specific skill to be good in a brain spark brainstorming situation, and luckily, like LeeAnne said, we've been through several different people, and we have like a perfect situation now. So
so this is an interesting question from Jess. The idea of casting is not necessarily something that writers are known for being aware of. I mean, we all kind of have a sense of what is a good actor, what is a good actress, but always are able to communicate that. So parts going into this process initially, finding your Dwight, finding your other characters, that's a big part of it. Can you talk a little bit about that process? And then how has those actors over the years, now that you've been with them for so long, informed the stories that you've been making? Are they participating in the writing, at least in the ideas for the writing concepts at all? Talk a little bit about that.
So there's two parts. I'll take the first part.
Sure.
So the casting process for our leads, for Dwight, Greta, and Baldrick, was a bigger process than we had anticipated, having not been through it before. And we were thrown a loop. We hired a casting director who was really highly recommended, had amazing credits, and we were supposed to start casting for the pilot on a Monday. And on Saturday she called me and she's like, I can't do it, I have to back out. I'm also casting a Nickelodeon show and we just lost our lead, I have to start over. And I was like, I'm going to kill you. Because in order to meet our production, timeline, which was already set, we had to start on that Monday. And so we spent the whole weekend, Saturday and Sunday scrambling, calling all these other casting directors. And luckily that lady who had to back out gave us some leads. And so we had to take, what we could get. And luckily, thankfully, we ended up with the best casting director and an incredible cast. But it all came together at the last moment. And then we ended up seeing, it was a nationwide casting search for those 3 roles. And we ended up, I think over 1,000 people read for each role.
We had over 1,000 submissions for Dwight and Greta. We obviously didn't look at 1,000 submissions ourselves. Our casting director went through them and gave us what they considered to be the strongest. So we probably looked at a couple hundred for each of those 2 characters. And
then once we got down to it, especially with Dwight and Greta, that was an interesting evolution as well, because we had, obviously you watch the tape, then you have callbacks, then you have, second callbacks and, chemistry sessions and sort of like that. After the first callback, we were pretty sure we knew who Dwight was going to be, and it wasn't who ended up being Dwight. And it was in that it was in the second callbacks and especially in the chemistry session where we both were like, whoa, that and it also became a little bit political because we had our idea and then the network started to chime in, and at first we didn't want to hear their advice, but they gave us some really good notes, and then our whole idea of Dwight and Greta changed in the casting process,
in the chemistry session.
So we were really excited. Obviously now we know we got the perfect cast, and we'll answer that part of the question also. One last little fun tidbit is Caitlin, who plays Greta, missed her callback. She had the wrong time or whatever, and she was supposed to come in and she didn't show, and her agent called, the casting director was freaking out because there was some miscommunication. So she ended up submitting another tape for us that really got her on our radar. So we were surprised how much in the very first callback, we were pretty committed to a Dwight and Greta, and neither one of those people ended up being it. And then, so to answer your question about how the characters have changed, you want to take that?
Yeah. So once we had our Dwight and our Greta and our Baldric and our Hexela and Clodwick, our core 5, and we were hearing their voices and seeing what they had brought to the characters, it absolutely influenced, it changed the way that we considered writing the scripts. And now we hear their voices as we write the scripts. When we go back, we had probably 4 or 5 scripts written before the casting. And when we go back and look at those scripts, the characters are different than what they are now, because certain elements that we thought were really going to work in the characters ended up kind of naturally falling away as the actors brought their specific talents to it. So, like, for example, I'll give you one. Greta initially was a much harsher character. If you look at her on the page in those first episodes that we wrote before Caitlin was cast, she's really quite a jerk. And we thought she was a funny jerk. Like, that was the whole point, is that Dwight is such a nice guy and Greta is just kind of a jerk. And we thought we could get some comedy mileage out of that. Well, then comes Caitlin into this role and put this new interpretation on it where Greta, she has her worldview, she has her way of doing things that's not the 21st century way, but the harshness just didn't feel right with her anymore. It was coming across really unkind. Yeah,
unlikable.
And we looked at it, we're like, that's because it's not natural to her interpretation of the character. It feels forced, it feels wrong. We need to think again about how to communicate that difference between Dwight and Greta without having Greta come across as unkind or mean-spirited. Yeah. And so we ended up really paring that down, changing it really significantly. Otherwise, I think it would have felt wrong, and it would have influenced the way that people felt about the character of Greta.
Yeah, and I'll give you one more example, kind of jumping off that. As we see what the actors bring to the role, we sometimes see things that we didn't imagine, or see like how great a certain element will be. And a perfect example of that is Baldric and Hexela. So we shot the pilot. The next episode we shot, just because of production requirements, was episode 7 of season 1. And the first scene we shot between Baldric and Hexela was this scene where they are in Hexela's back room and they're over a map, and they had this incredible sparkling chemistry, this romantic tension, which obviously we had hoped for, but it was so much better than we had imagined. And we actually went back and rewrote some other scenes that they were
to give them more of that.
Because it was just like, oh my gosh, this is gold. And then ever since that moment, we've always known like that spark of romantic chemistry is so fun and funny and just titillating. So that's another thing that we've seen as the actors have brought something. We've given them more of that because it's great.
Great, amazing. Talk a little bit about your process, because I know Molly has a writing partner, and I've written things with other people, and I think we do have some partners in the audience. How does it work with you? Are you writing in the same room, or does somebody take a scene, or how do you work?
Yeah. So we don't write in the same room. We would never get anything done. So we each have our own little writing space. We do all the development together. I mean, starting from before we assemble for a writer's summit, Brian and I have sat down and like mapped out what we think are the big questions for the writer's summit and the main thrust of the storyline. So we do all of the development together.
And we do a lot of that on walks. We we log a lot of miles. We live close to some trails that are normally open. They're not currently, but we go on walks. We'll sort of set out with a question, and sometimes we'll take a pad and pen in our pocket. So like, okay, this is the question we need to answer on this walk, and we go and we
walk for miles.
Walk for a long time discussing things, and that helps sort of get new ideas cooking as well.
So we'll have kind of an idea, an outline of what we think a story should be for an episode, let's say, and then we'll split apart to tackle different sections of it. So there are certain characters that Brian is really good at writing. He's really good at writing Clodwick, for example. So if it's an episode that
the unhinged lunatic just comes naturally.
So if we know that it's a heavy Clodwick episode, or this section is going to have a lot of Clodwick, then he'll take the first pass at it. and I'll work on another part of that episode or a different one. We'll kind of break it down into scenes, or if one of us has a really good idea of like, oh, I think I know what to do with this scene. This is going to be really fun. Let that person run with it. Then once we have it assembled into kind of a Frankenstein of an episode, very, very rough, then we start sort of rewriting one another. And that is it's the most important and the most treacherous part of the process.
Especially when you're married.
So we have to be careful about that, but we've gotten used to it now.
Well, and I think it also has helped, and it's like total frankness. LeeAnne has been like my writing professor. I mean, everything I know about writing, she's taught me over, 14 years. We've been doing this however long. And I think it helps. Obviously, there's a lot of times where I fight for an idea, sometimes too fiercely. But at the end of the day, I think it helps our process to, respect the genius brain in here.
Thank you.
And so at some point, there's going to be disagreements, and you have to kind of find a solution together. And that's helpful.
Yeah. But you have to learn to embrace compromise and to understand that if you wanted to do something all on your own, you should be a novelist. You should not be in this business.
A painter would be a good career.
Yeah, this is all about collaboration. This business is all about collaboration and entertaining others' ideas and respecting them. And so, we've learned to do it. And now we're to a place too where we can just kind of see what's working and what isn't working and work to improve it. And so whenever he's gives notes on what I've written or I give notes on what he's written, we know by now that there's no like political machinations going on between us. It's just trying to make the script the very best it can be.
Well, in that old movie, All the President's Men, written by William Goldman, I don't know if you remember that, there's a scene where Woodward and Bernstein, the newspaper writers, are working on this project, Watergate, together. And one of them, I think Bernstein rewrote Woodward or something like that.
Justin Hoffman rewrote Robert Redford.
That's how it went. And Robert Redford was kind of pissed about it, but then he looked at it and he read it and he's like, that's better. And so you have to have that humility just to recognize when something is better and not let the ego get in the way. Although it's going to happen too.
Yeah, it's going to happen sometimes. But mostly, we've kind of hit a good stride with it. But did that answer your question about
Absolutely.
how we
That's
tackle
great.
it? Okay.
Yeah. All right, Molly, we'll do a couple more audience questions. We got about 10 more minutes left.
Cool.
Yeah, so Jackie was asking if you have advice for developing rapport with the director of a show you're running. And I think maybe also, the structure of how you guys have shot Dwight is something in and of itself. Like
batty.
back to back. And is that played into kind of how you structured the show and the directors and things?
Yeah, I think
it has
the idea of communicating the tone to your directors when you're going in is like, this is what the show needs to do.
Yeah.
That is really tricky. And again, coming from a feature world, it was a learning process for us, because I think in the beginning we were too deferential to the director and to the directors, and we had to kind of learn that. We learned a process. We have 5 meetings that we do before every episode.
Yeah,
we want to talk about those, and that helps in that process.
This is one of those cases where we learned a lot from people more experienced than us. As we were struggling with this in the beginning, a very good friend and director and co-producer on our show, Jeff Hunt, sat us down very early. He's done 100 episodes or more of network television. Like, he knows what he's doing. And he said, listen, this is how you need to do it so that everyone understands what you want. And you have to have this series of meetings and have them in this order. And here's who needs to attend. And here's how you keep everyone accountable for what you've told them you want done. And so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We were able to benefit from that really established process. So we start every episode with a concept meeting where the director and all the producers and all of the department heads are there. And we go through the script with this huge group of people around the table, and we highlight everything that's going to matter to every department. So, if Clodwig is going to get set on fire in this episode, then special effects and visual effects need to be there, and stunts needs to be there, and the director needs to be able to explain how this is going to be done. And that meeting, Brian and I run it. We talk through the script, and we basically talk on a high level about, like, this is what we see happening in the story. Then all those guys go, they know what they need to do for the episode. Then we sit down, usually the next day, with the director for what's called a tone meeting, which from my point of view is the most important meeting that we have. And it's just the director and the first AD that are there usually at that meeting. And we go through the lines of the script and really talk about what the characters are feeling, where the emotional shifts are in the scene, because they're going to have to communicate all of this to the actors. They're going to have to say, like, all right, this is the moment when you realize he's been lying to you. This is the moment when your defenses come up, or this is the moment when you realize, oh my gosh, I might love this girl. And so we have to communicate all that to the director, going through line by line. That meeting can take a couple of hours. Doesn't always, but it can if it's a really tricky script. And then from there, the director should, at that point, we've done like a brain dump. Everything that's on the page, they've had to look at for a few days, but now they know what our intention was for everything on the page. And going to the question from earlier, like, how do you develop a rapport with the director? That's really tricky. I mean, most directors that come onto a TV show that are experienced TV directors, they know that, that there's sort of a chain of command, and that their job is to communicate the vision of the show, to maintain the tone and style of the show. They're not usually there to be a maverick. Right. You know, they're there to like guide that ship safely into port.
It's true, and that's obviously our dream scenario for a director. But it's been a balancing act for us as well, to on one hand make sure that the vision of the show is consistent. On the other hand, the director, it's his or her episode, and you do want to let them take some ownership and let them play, and obviously you hired them because you want their ideas too, and so that's developing that rapport. It's a two-way relationship of trust, back and forth, where you have to let them play with some ideas, even some that don't work out. That's okay. It's on them. They have to deliver an episode that that works, and then they also need to understand that we have been doing this particular show for 10 years now, and so there's a lot of stuff stuck in our brains that they coming in as a new director don't have. So
and without exception, the directors that have come onto our show have been very respectful of the show and of our intention for the show. We've never had an experience with a director where he or she was like, well, but shouldn't it be like this? Like, that's just not really the approach that they usually take. If you are dealing with a combative director like that who's really challenging your vision of the show or the episode, you're probably dealing with an inexperienced director who doesn't really understand how the process is designed to achieve success, and is maybe thinking more about how they can assert their own vision. So not to say that is a deal killer, but just be aware, like, okay, it might be some inexperience talking here from this director. But like Brian says, there's a lot of collaboration, and one thing that you can always say is, let's try it. Okay, like I think this is a worthy idea. Let's try it. Let's also make sure we can do it the other way.
Let's get what's on the page also, just in case.
Make sure we have what's on the page, and then let's try it. And see, because you don't want to slam the door on someone else's good ideas. It is definitely a balancing act. Your characters, your tone and your style. If you're true to that, then you can let your director be very free with everything else.
Right. And then just to finish up on the meetings, I'm sorry, I jumped in on that. So we also, we have a table read with the actors, and we that's where we start stepping back from the process, and we let the director, direct that table read and give whatever notes he or she may have. And then, the final meeting we usually have is the final big meeting is the production meeting. And at that point, it's at the end of the director's prep, and the director and the first AD have gone through in minute detail every line, every scene. And then the first AD and the director run the meeting at that point, and then they communicate to all the department heads, and which that's another big meeting where every department head is there. They communicate that to all of those people, and that's when they really start taking ownership. And we're usually there to answer any questions, but we're trying to step back at that point and let them take ownership of the episode.
That's great. We'll do one more question. This is kind of an amalgamation between a couple of different ones, but going to your writing style, this is a comedy, but it's a pretty specific comedy because of what we talked about before. Can you talk a little bit about some of your background in comedy writing and what you did to prepare for this particular? Was it just ingrained into you, and this is just your natural sensibility, or did you really have to like climb a hill to get there?
So there was definitely a hill. We started as drama writers. Like, if you were to read our early stuff, you'd be like, really? It's not very funny. And
we had some insecurities too about like, can we even do comedy? But shows like this demand it, so it's like we had to make it happen.
Yeah, but you know, it wasn't like we made the shift from, you know, writing heavy drama to writing a family comedy overnight. We had, you know, about 12 years to dabble in all kinds of different genres, and we'd actually spent probably 4 or 5 years before Dwight really working in like the kid and family space in features. So for Vanguard Animation, we had done a couple of projects that were family oriented. So and for Disney Channel and Disney XD and Amazon and Awesomeness, those had all been geared at either YA audiences or family or kid audiences. So,
and they all started incorporating, you know, elements of humor, which
it was a big part of it. So we've been kind of working those muscles out for a few years before we got into Dwight. And the sense of humor of Dwight is probably, it's right in our sweet spot. It's not the type of script like a multicam comedy for Nickelodeon, let's say, where they want to see 2 laughs per page. It's a formula, like you better have that. It's not a show that's like that. There are highlights and lowlights to it. There are serious scenes in it, and then there are these outrageous kind of physical comedy, farcical scenes as well. And so that has really allowed us to play in a way that a lot of shows wouldn't have. We don't feel like we have to just always be hitting the funny. It's funnier if the scene before was more sincere, or had some danger to it, or had some real peril or drama. Then when you turn around with the laugh, then it's like a release for the audience. So we approached it that way. We really let the characters and the storytelling dictate when it's going to be funny, rather than like pulling our hair out saying, this isn't funny. You're never going to get real comedy with that sort of anxiety. So
well, and it's good to have sort of obviously examples and hero writers. And I think one who's really influenced, you know, both of us and definitely the show is P.G. Wodehouse, who's a novelist, but that he has such a beautiful, witty sense of humor, and it's about the richness and beauty of the language. And at least according to legend, he used to write every sentence of his novel up on note cards on the wall and look at everyone. I don't know if he really did that.
Until it was perfect.
So it was perfect. And you can, when you read his novels, I'm not sure if you're familiar with P.G. Wodehouse. He wrote, you know, over 100 years ago. But, you know, the Jeeves novels and Leave It to Smith, when you read those, it just, the beauty and the hilarity in the language and the wit. You know, it's been something that we've learned from and tried to emulate, frankly.
Yeah, tried and failed. But no, it's true. We definitely have our heroes and our touchstones. The Princess Bride, we probably think about The Princess Bride with every episode because tonally it's perfect for us.
Yeah, William Goldman was another huge influence on our style.
Yeah, this definitely feels in that world, which is why it's great, and which is why it's resonating with people, because that world, people are familiar with that, it's accepting, and there's a reason why it's standing the test of time, which hopefully Dwight in Shining Armor will stand the test of time.
I hope so.
So, and with that, I want to say thank you so much for participating in this. If there was an audience that could clap, we would all be clapping for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Raymond and Molly, thank you, everyone.
You mentioned podcasts for your show too.
Oh
yeah. So we please check out the show Dwight in Shining Armor on BYUtv. It's on Apple TV and on Roku and, you know, all those places. And also we do a podcast for every episode. The podcast is called The Sunken Kingdom. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, really anywhere you get the podcast. If you search Dwight in Shining Armor or The Sunken Kingdom, there's Josh Breslow, who plays Jacopo, hosts and produces with us the podcast. It's really fun. There's a lot of behind the scenes information and more of this type of information of how do you get a show made, or how do you tackle this production problem. It's really, really informative. I've actually learned several things from it.
He gets great guests on it, so it's really informative. And,
so check that out.
Also, big shout out to Geekdom Observer.
Yeah.
He reviews every episode of our show and gives it a very, very thoughtful review that gets us thinking. So he's great. Wonderful.
You can find him on Twitter and on Facebook and on the internets, just the Geekdom Observer if you search
and
that.
We just added links to both of those in our chat window.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So thank you so much again for all of our viewers. There's a lot of details about what's happening next in our chat window, and we'll be mailing it out. Let us know who you would like to see, the type of person you'd like to see next on this kind of thing, and what ideas and advice you might have for us as we move forward. So thank you so much. And Molly, you want to plug one more time what's happening next week? Are we good?
Yeah, our next Ask a Pro Anything is with screenwriters Lane and Rekka Sky. They'll be talking about kind of the feature film world and have had some particular successes recently that we can talk about. And that's Thursday, May 7th.
Yeah, also a married couple. So maybe we're doing like a marriage couple. Like great.
Awesome.
All right, thank you guys so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Raymond. Thank you, Molly.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.